My name is Janice McWilliams, and I have just recently become an elder here at the church, been going here about 15 years. And I work with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, and I'm a psychotherapist, so I do those two things in my vocational life. But I have been reflecting on Jonah, the chapter 2, the part of the story when he is in the belly of the huge fish that God provides. So I'm so glad that that video depicted so well what it must have been like to be in the belly of a huge fish. Now, what I think about that time in the story is that Jonah was kind of just pared down to the most base part of his personality. He saw something of who he was that he wouldn't have seen another way when he was in the belly. Now, I was thinking, when have I kind of experienced that paring down of my personality to just the basic level? And I thought, labor and childbirth did that to me. Now, I was one of these women that came in, I am not going to use any drugs during labor, and I, would say that to anyone who wanted to listen to my birth plan. And so my friend, she said to me, you never know how you're going to respond to the pain of labor. And I was like, maybe you, but I'm kind of reasonably fit. I can do this. It turns out I didn't really know how I was going to respond to the pain of labor. So after I cried out for drugs, I became what I'm going to call the kooky prayer lady, okay? So at that basement part of my personality, I become the kooky prayer lady. So when they come to give you the medication to help your labor and delivery, they read you this long list of all the horrible things that could go wrong before they give it to you. And it's kind of like a drug commercial, And so they're administering it to me, and I'm like, in the name of Jesus, I pray against a 3-week headache, I pray against paralysis, I pray, all the things that I could remember the person had said. I tend to remember everybody's name in this situation too, so I'll call people out, Jim, are you praying? Are you really praying right now? They'd be like, yeah, we're all praying, kind of scared of me. There was a point when the midwife said to me, that's right, Janice, pray to your God. And I'm like, not my God, the God. Hey, kooky prayer lady has shown up to the delivery room. So that's kind of where I go in times like that. So Jonah, at this point in the story, we get to see, what is he like when he's just at that base level of who he is? Where does he turn? The story up to this point has been that Jonah had this job, and his job was being a prophet. And the prophets are supposed to respond to God when God wants to give a word to a group of people. And God wanted that to happen through Jonah for the city of Nineveh. And Jonah did not like Nineveh. And so he ran away instead on a ship to a place called Tarshish, which is sort of like running away to Hawaii, I suppose. So basically, this is a story about a guy who does not trust God, who's bad at his job, and hates people. So it's my kind of story. Anyway, we find ourselves on the ship with the storm that the scriptures say that the Lord provides. So a storm kicks up, and as you remember from last week, if you were here, the people on the other sailors become very scared, and they start calling out to every god they can think of, and they finally get Jonah, and Jonah says, hey, this storm is here because of me. Throw me overboard, and the storm will end. Okay, so I'm trying to picture what Jonah's mindset is at this point, because is he being kind of altruistic, like he doesn't want all these people to die? And so he tells them what the solution is. But then I realized if he were truly altruistic, he would have just jumped, right? He makes them throw him overboard. And so what's going on? I think that there's something about the depth of his rebellion and anger and hurt that he would rather jump into the sea and die than obey God. Maybe even he sees that he deserves this, having run from God, and he sees it as a just end. In any case, whatever his mindset is, I don't think you jump into the sea and expect to survive. He's saying, the story is over. But God thought otherwise. The story turns at this point, and the scriptures say that the Lord provided a huge fish. And this huge fish swallows Jonah. Okay, I'm fairly certain that that's not what he would have expected. Maybe to get chewed up by a fish, but to find himself in the belly of this fish for 3 days and 3 nights. What is he thinking of being in that belly? The story kind of slows down with that 3 days and 3 nights at this point. And I think of experiences that are like that. There's been a big storm, but then things kind of creak, and you don't know where it's going to go. Something's changed, but you can't see your way out of it. I think those in-the-belly experiences are times when we're stuck and waiting to see, is our business going to fail, or is it going to survive? To see, is the chemo going to work? You know, is our kid going to be okay at that summer experience they're having? I was thinking about all the experiences that have been belly experiences for me. And one of them happened to me my senior year in college. How many people out there have had their heart broken? Oh, good. Okay, I'm not alone. How many people have had their heart broken by a Frenchman? Okay. There was someone in the last service too, you know. So yes, I had this relationship. I thought it was a great relationship with the gentleman I will refer to as the Frenchman, and we were kind of planning our lives together. I was in Virginia, he was in California. I was going to move there. We were going to be on staff with InterVarsity, and we're probably going to get married. And I was loving this plan. Well, then something happened behind the scenes. See, Dan knew the Frenchman. Dan is the man I'm married to now. And he was in the InterVarsity fellowship at UC Santa Cruz with the Frenchman. And Dan developed a crush on a woman named Jill. And so Dan told Jill he had a crush on her. And she said, you know, I don't return the feelings because I'm hopelessly in love with the Frenchman. Okay, so this conversation in part emboldened Jill to tell the Frenchman of her undying love for him, which sent him into a swirl of confusion that ended with him dumping me. So I was in the belly at that point. You know, I thought I knew where my life was going, and all of a sudden, things stalled out. And I don't do heartbreak pretty, you know. I'm not mature and healthy, none of those things. I mean, I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping. You know that thing where you wake up insanely early and you just like suffer until other people wake up? I mean, I was doing all that. It was right before my final exam, so I was like weeping through my finals and my graduation from college. It was not pretty. I couldn't see how I was going to get out. Now I can see that my in-the-belly experience fit into the plan of my life kind of well. I don't think I ever would have considered moving to California and working with InterVarsity were it not for love. And even though I had experienced heartbreak in the timeline, I never would have met Dan. I never would have married him. I wouldn't have the particular children that I love and adore. And I wouldn't have had these shaping experiences of ministry in my 20s in that wonderful community. It was part of my story that's kind of, in a convoluted way, landed me here. I couldn't see it from the belly, but now I can see that God's hand was there, working and delivering me. Now, one thing I really love about what happens is that, so he's in the belly for 3 days, and then he starts to pray. I was kind of looking at this prayer and trying to analyze it and figure out what I thought of it. Because you would think that at this point, the opening line would be something like, I'm really sorry, I messed up. But it doesn't really start like that. What Jonah does seem to do is remember the Psalms. This prayer reads like a psalm. And I think he's remembering the Psalms. Some of the bits of it are quotes from different Psalms. But it's like he writes it and personalizes it for himself. Listen to all the water, ocean-themed parts of the first 7 verses of this. In my distress, I called to the Lord, and he answered me. From deep in the realm of the dead, I called for help, and you listened to my cry. You hurled me into the deep, into the very heart of the seas, and the currents swirled about me. Your waves and breakers swept over me. I said, I have been banished from your sight, yet I will look again towards your holy temple. The engulfing waters threatened me. The deep surrounded me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. Talk about an ocean theme. To the roots of the mountains I sank down. The earth beneath barred me in forever. But you, Lord my God, brought my life up from the pit. When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord, and my prayer rose to you, to your holy temple. Jonah gives us a model here in that he writes his own psalm and he personalizes it. He makes it fit with this very situation that he's in, and then he prays it. You know, this is something we can follow suit and do, to write our own psalm and then pray it, and to see what God has for us. What he does then is that he has a change of heart, it seems. Through writing and reflecting and praying this prayer, his heart starts to crack open. In the last couple of verses, in the last half of verse 9, he says, what I have vowed, I will make good. It seems at this point he's saying, I vowed to be a prophet, and okay, I'll be a prophet. And he also declares, in an act of hope and faith, what I have vowed, I will make good, and I will say, salvation comes from the Lord. When he's stripped down to the most base part of his personality and spends 3 days and 3 nights stalled out, not knowing where the story is going, he's able to say, salvation comes from the Lord. You know, before the belly, I think he thought salvation was in Tarshish, right? Before my experience in the belly, I thought that my life was with the Frenchmen. Now, after the belly, you come down to that place. You know, are you a kooky prayer lady? Are you clinging to the things that you know of God? That's where the belly has the potential to take us. I'm in small group with Sheldon and Kathy Lentz, and we had small group this week, and I was telling them I was preaching on this, and Sheldon said, oh, that's the best part of Jonah. And truthfully, I wasn't really agreeing at that time. I was like, all actions and the other parts. But I was growing to appreciate, especially through this conversation, this action was really good too. And I asked, you know, so what do you love so much about it? And he said that the promise of being able to turn to the temple, to see the temple, had become very real for him when he was desperately ill. And Sheldon has the unwelcome distinction in my life of being at Johns Hopkins Hospital more days than anyone I know. And it was in a bleak time for him when he was very ill that Kathy came to him and read this prayer to him. And he took it as his own, and he gripped on to the promise of seeing the temple of the Lord. You see, when we are brought down to kind of our lowest places, like we can write and personalize a psalm and pray it, and our hearts might change because we do it. And sometimes we just need somebody else to bring the promises of God to us, like Kathy did for him. You know, every once in a while, I feel like I go through a cycle where I send out this SOS prayer to email to my praying friends saying, help, I don't know what to do about the crisis of the hour, you know, and then I get a response like that. People will email me back the promises of God at a time when I can barely grasp them on my own. We can do that for each other. Now, this summer, I was just devotionally reading the Gospel of Matthew, and I got to chapter 16, and in chapter 16, the Pharisees and Sadducees are coming to Jesus, and they're demanding a miraculous sign from him. And he says, you're not going to get a sign. The only sign you're going to get is the sign of Jonah. And it's a little like, what? You know, Jonah, oh, okay, what's happening here? And so when you look at what that sign, what he meant when he said that, there's kind of, if you fast forward in the life of Jesus, you can see that people might go, oh, Jonah was in the belly for 3 days. Jesus was in the tomb for 3 days. What's the connection here? Now, at this point in the story, though, the Sadducees and Pharisees don't know that that's how the story is going to go, but they do know the story of Jonah. And they do know that Jonah was a prophet who ran away from God. And they do know that God sent a storm and a huge fish to work in his life to save him. God relentlessly and creatively pursued Jonah. And the Pharisees and Sadducees would have known that. And so I imagine that Jesus is telling them this story and saying, Jonah's a sign to you. You are running away from God, and God is relentlessly and creatively pursuing you, and I am the sign of that. You see, Jesus incarnate is the ultimate sign that Jonah points to of us being relentlessly and creatively pursued by God. So we can run away. We can think that our story is over, but God thinks otherwise. There's more coming. We are being relentlessly and creatively pursued. I'm sure that a lot of you today are having an in-the-belly experience. It's hard. It's awful. But take heart. We know because of the story of Jonah and because of the very reality of Jesus that we may think the story is over, but God thinks otherwise. The very moments we're most pressed sometimes make the most sense in the future. And may that be where your story goes.